Today, May 29th, is John F. Kennedy's 108th birthday. He, of course, is one of those guys that everyone loves to claim him. Liberals of today say, oh, yeah, he was great. Republicans say he was great. MAGA Republicans, though, have the special audacity to say that he is one of them. They still say, oh, JFK, he was such a centrist. He was such a conservative-ish guy. He would actually support Trump. And look, RFK Jr., a Kennedy, is in Trump's administration. Why? The proof is in the pudding here. JFK would be a MAGA Republican. The Republicans are so normal, and the Democrats have shifted so far left that, well, of course, JFK would have no choice but to join the Republican Party, as would any Democrat from the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, all that. They say, oh yeah, the Democrats have just gone far left, and the Republicans are just the normal people. Well, it's time we pop that talking point like a balloon. It's a load of nonsense, and it's ignoring crucial context, which is sadly something that many Trump supporters tend to do in making their arguments to normalize Trump. They need to ignore context and they need to be vague in order to normalize Trump. So JFK, of course, was a Democrat, not a Republican. He was elected after a Republican President Eisenhower. He narrowly defeated Richard Nixon, a Republican who is less right-wing than many modern Republicans. We can say that. Now, JFK, if there's any element of truth in the idea that, oh, he would be a Republican, well, there is none, but he is certainly less left-leaning than other Democrats. LBJ was more progressive than JFK in terms of the policy he enacted. And there is even some evidence that LBJ was sort of resentful of JFK for not being progressive enough. That he was like, okay, I'm the guy who knows how to get legislation done. I'm the guy who was a Senate Majority Leader. JFK is just this, pampered rich kid, this dude who doesn't know anything. He trashed the Kennedys, LBJ famously did. So LBJ was more left-wing than JFK. FDR was more left-wing on economics than JFK. I think you could argue that on some issues, even Jimmy Carter was more left-leaning than JFK, certainly in terms of pursuing world peace and not being really aggressive with the military. JFK was staunchly anti-communist, and he was not afraid to use the military to fight communism aggressively overseas. Even though the Vietnam War did escalate more famously under Lyndon B. Johnson, JFK still played a role in it. So JFK is one of those guys, yeah, he cut taxes. He did. He cut the top marginal tax rate. Republicans will be like, oh yeah, that's so cool. This proves he was a conservative. But again, they have to ignore the context. JFK's tax cuts still brought the top tax rate higher than what a lot of Republicans would like it to be. He brought it down to roughly in the 60s or so from the 90s, the low 90s. He brought it down to the 60s. A lot of conservative Republicans will spaz out about Bernie Sanders, for example, among other people, saying that the tax rate for the top 1% or so should go up to about 52 or 54%. They spazzed out. They said he's going to take half your money, be scared, be afraid of this communism. So by their own logic, JFK is actually more communistic than Bernie Sanders, even if he lowered the top marginal tax rate relative to what it was before. JFK also advocated for universal health care, believe it or not. Bill Clinton tried to get it through later in the 90s, but JFK was an early advocate of it. He went out there and said, yeah, look at the system they have in Europe. It's pretty cool. Healthcare is an important thing. It's too important to chalk up to the free market and private enterprise. We need to do something to provide healthcare to people so that they're not going bankrupt as a result of medical bills. He would be called a communist and or a socialist as a result of these talking points in the USA. Conservatives in particular would be like, this is communist nonsense. We can't elect this guy. If you vote for this guy, you're a communist. They would never, ever try to own this guy. Trump supporters would never try to own this guy as one of theirs. They would try to own him in the sense of debating him and destroying him, possibly like, Charlie Kirk and Ben Shapiro allegedly do. But they would be like, no, we don't want anything to do with this guy. This guy's a lunatic leftist. JFK also, he was instrumental in starting up the Civil Rights Act. And now it is true that plenty of Republicans in Congress voted for the Civil Rights Act, but it was signed by a Democratic president. And how the Republican Party reacted to the Johnson-Kennedy administrations and their passage of the Civil Rights Act speaks volumes about them. They did the Southern Strategy. It was because of JFK that they did the Southern Strategy. JFK encouraged passage of a Civil Rights Act. When he was assassinated, LBJ actually capitalized on that in a sense. The nation was very sad. They were devastated about this young, charismatic president being shot in the head and killed. And so he said, it's time to pass a Civil Rights Act. And they passed a Civil Rights Act. He was so aggressive about it with his buddies in the Senate. He was just a master legislator, and he got a lot of his progressive legislation done because of the vision of John F. Kennedy, because John F. Kennedy's death, in a sense, sort of gave him this big electoral landslide in 1964. And yeah, JFK was super popular. We don't know if he stayed in office, if he would have been popular, if the nation had 8 years of him, would his approval rating be down at like 22%? I have no idea. The country was less partisan back then, so probably not. But he was a popular guy. He was not necessarily popular because he was a liberal or a conservative, though. We can make that clear. Being a leftist president doesn't automatically make you popular, and being a conservative president doesn't automatically make you unpopular. See Ronald Reagan for an example of an extremely popular conservative president, even if he wasn't super conservative on some issues, such as the border with his grants of amnesty in 1986. But JFK, yeah, he was one of those guys. Low taxes, lowering taxes, but still having taxes very high, even after World War II was done, by the way. So taxes were higher during World War II for a reason. They needed revenue. The government needed revenue to be able to do things. It stimulated the economy, by the way. It's called Keynesian economics. JFK was a Keynesian. He was not one of those trickle-down people of Reagan in his era. He was not one of what I would say the trumped up trickle-down economics, or what Hillary Clinton would say is trumped up trickle-down economics of the Donald Trump era, where he's just like actually being really aggressive and just openly almost saying, rich people, we only care about you, poor and middle-class people, get bent. JFK, again, on economics, center-left, not the most left-leaning. He didn't set up some sort of universal healthcare system or universal education system. He didn't raise the minimum wage super high necessarily. No, he was not a super big federal government involved in the economy type guy, but he was aiming for that. He was with universal health care. Lyndon B. Johnson didn't even get universal health care passed. So it's something that Democrats have talked about for a long time, and they haven't succeeded in it. Obama campaigned on universal health care. He dropped it in 2012. He wasn't talking about it. But yeah, that was one instance where JFK actually was to the left of 2012 Obama, because by 2012 Obama had already gotten the Affordable Care Act passed, and it was like, okay, healthcare reform done, let's focus on new things. And usually those new things tend to be foreign policy later on in a president's second term or end of their first term, where they're like, okay, the domestic agenda is thwarted by Congress. And by that point, Congress had been taken over by Republicans. But JFK also said, ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. And let's stop and think, what has Trump done for his country? What has Trump done for his country? That list would be pretty naked. It would be pretty naked. It would be pretty blank. And JFK would not be very happy about it. He would come into the room with his arms crossed. He'd go, Mr. Trump, you have not done anything for your country. Shame on you. You're a bastard. You jack shit, chicken shit. What you doing, man? No. But he would not be a fan of the guy. And in fact, who also wasn't a fan of the guy? Eisenhower, a Republican, was not a fan of the Trumps, I should say. Not President Trump himself, but Trump's dad. Yeah, these people are shady. They take advantage of the United States. They only reap benefits from the United States, and they don't provide any benefits. That is the exact problem. So yeah, JFK would likely, ironically, see Trump as just a giant leech. Perhaps, as Reagan said, he would see him as a welfare queen. A welfare queen. Reagan didn't call Trump a welfare queen, but JFK would be like, oh yeah, Donald Trump, Elon Musk, they're welfare queens. JFK would be repulsed by the idea of Trump schmoozing it up with the richest guy on the planet, having him in his administration. They had plenty of things in common. Look, let's be fair. They had things in common, possible infidelity on JFK's part. So look, but that's just personal stuff. So yeah, he's a guy who still favored higher taxes, even if he lowered them. He favored universal health care. He actually was serious about civil rights. He wasn't doing it as a ploy to just get black people to vote for Democrats, which there's some evidence that Lyndon B. Johnson was actually doing. So this was overall a center-left dude. Republicans and MAGA will call anyone who is, center-right even, they will call them a communist or a socialist. They will absolutely excoriate them. They will say they're traitors to the country. That's what they say about John McCain. John McCain never campaigned on universal health care. He wasn't nearly as progressive as JFK, and they still say, oh, he's a traitor. He voted to keep Obamacare. He did that thumbs down gesture. Yeah, so they say he's a traitor. He voted against Trump. He's bad. He criticized Trump. He's a war hero because he was captured. I like people who weren't captured, Trump said about him. How would JFK feel about Trump saying that? JFK himself was a veteran. How would JFK feel about Trump allegedly saying that people who fought in World War I, people who are veterans who serve this country, are suckers and losers? How would he feel about those allegations? He would say, wow, the president has sunk to a new low. The president has sunk to a new low. And so, ironically, it's actually more apt for Democrats to try to claim people like Nixon or Reagan than it is for Republicans to claim people like JFK. Yeah, you heard me. It actually is. And I'm not saying Reagan would be a Democrat today or Nixon would be a Democrat today, but they have more in common with the modern Democrats than JFK does with Trump and the Republicans. It's because Trump and the Republicans have shifted so far right, while the Democrats have mostly remained the same. Mostly remained the same. They've shifted left on some issues. They've gotten a little more, I guess you could say, woke in some of their rhetoric, but rhetoric is not policy. Rhetoric is not policy. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Happy birthday, President John F. Kennedy. RFK Jr., if you're watching this, please stop swimming in raw sewage. It's really not good for you. I'm just trying to make you healthy again. Thank you so much for watching, and I look forward to speaking to you in my next video.